Hi, today I'm going to tell you about tracing funnel feature. And before we dive into deep into it, let me start with the traces. So we already know what distributed traces are. So let me just give you an example of what tracing funnels with an example of a trace. Here I see there are 52 spans in this trace, and maybe analyzing that would be very difficult because there are just so many spans in that trace. But what if I want to understand what's happening between transition between different spans across multiple trace IDs? To do that, what I can actually do is create a funnel out of it. Okay, so want to understand how the transition from checkout service, which is doing the HTTP post operation, to checkout service, which is doing order publish operation, to checkout service, no, sorry, fraud detection service, which is doing order processing operation. I want to understand how this is happening across multiple trace IDs. So let me just do that. I've already created a funnel. I will show you how to create a funnel. I can just update the step one with the span that I'm interested into. And then I can click on another span which I'm interested into. And then I can maybe add one more step to it and click here to add that as a third step in this span. Now once I do that, I can just click here and open the funnel and it will do the aggregation across multiple trace IDs during that last 30 minutes. So what actually it means? It means that the specific span that I've defined here as a funnel step 1 and the span that I have defined here as a step 2 and the funnel step and the span that I have defined here as a funnel step 3, how they are making this transition here in and the aggregation of average duration, errors, and P99 across multiple trace IDs. So this gives me a quick idea on how to analyze these spans across multiple trace IDs. So as you can see here, there is no problem. The conversion rate is 100%, which means all the spans from the funnel step 1 are reaching to the final step. There are no errors, and the transition from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, you can just click here to see things in more detail. But what I want to show here is, okay, the P99 for the overall funnel matrix is 1 second, average duration is 213 millisecond. And if I see the things for step 1 and step 2, I see average duration is 148 milliseconds, which is approximately half of this one. And P99 latency is 479 milliseconds, which is less as compared to this. So I'm expecting that maybe the spans and the transition from span 2 to span 3 is taking this much time. So 64 milliseconds and 293 milliseconds. Indeed, this is happening here that step 1 to step 2 is contributing most for the P99 latency. Now let's just go back and maybe understand how you can make use of this feature. So you can come here and create a new funnel for demo. And just like I have defined uh, the step 1 and step 2, you can either select the service name and select the span name and maybe select another service name and select the span name. And if there are valid traces that would show up here, but since I randomly picked some of the service and span name, there are no valid traces for it. What I find useful is just go to a trace ID, pick a trace which you are interested into, and then put those spans into your funnel ID just like that. Clicking on here, replacing the span, and then understanding the matrix from here. In this particular funnel, I see there is indeed a drop of 32% of spans, which means something is happening and all the spans from funnel step 1 are not reaching to the funnel step 2. Also, I can see the top 5 slowest trace. If I click here, You can just go and look at the underlying traces. All right. Now I have created some of the funnels already to give you an overview around how you can make use of this feature. So for example, in this particular example, there are only two funnel steps, the duration is 1 hour, and everything is getting converted. Maybe let me pull an example where there are some errors. That could be this one. Let's just see. All right, here there is a 32% drop in the spans, and in the front end flow, we have, okay, we can try to understand things in more depth here. So what is happening here is there are 1,000 spans in the step one, 10K span in step 2, and 3.8K spans in step 3. So indeed, not all spans are getting converted. The conversion rate is 3.8%, which means something is happening with my services. There are also error happening for the step 2, and I can see those trace IDs here. So there are three errors happening here, and I can see those three errors happening here as well. I can just go and look at the trace IDs. So, and then I can just further try to investigate why the error is happening. Also, I see the top five slowest traces in the funnel transition. So all the spans which are creating problem or maybe at the slowest from transition from step 1 to step 2 of my funnel would be shown here, and you can just try and understand why these spans are slow. Maybe there's something off with your services, or there is some latency introduced, maybe due to increasing your consumer group lag in Kafka, for example. All right, so this is for step 1 to step 2. Overall average duration is 110 milliseconds, and here the average duration is 100 milliseconds. And if I go and look at step 2 to 3, I see the conversion rate here should be better, that's 37%, and the average duration here is only 1.33 milliseconds. As compared to overall funnel metrics, the average duration here is 100 milliseconds, which gives me another idea that all the spans that are coming from step 1 to step 2, they are taking most of the time as compared to the spans that are flowing from step 2 to step 3 across multiple trace IDs. Yeah, to rephrase that, basically all the trace IDs which contains the spans from step 1, spans from step 2, spans from step 3, the overall conversion for this particular funnel is 3.8%. Average duration is 110 milliseconds. But when I try to dive deeper into it, I see there are three traces where there is error happening. I get those trace IDs here in the step 1 to step 2 transition, and also I can compare the average duration. So average duration here is 106 milliseconds, and average duration here is 110 milliseconds, which means all the spans that are transitioning from step 1 to step 2 are taking most of the time, and these are the spans which are creating error. Now, if I go back to step 2 and step 3, I'm expecting that the average duration should be less because maybe the spans which are transitioning from 1 to 2 are taking most of the time. And if I go to step 2 and step 3, and I see that, okay, this average duration is less as compared to step 1 and step 2. So all this metrics gives you a lot of insight, right? So if as compared to just a corresponding trace, for example, if I go and open the trace here, like analyzing this trace is very hard because there are so many spans, and like we support up to 1 million spans. Now understanding how things are happening across multiple trace IDs for a given trace execution pattern, it's very hard. But if you create a funnel out of it, you get a lot of insights just by creating the funnel. From here, you understand what's happening between the transition from step 1 to step 2, what's happening for the transition from step 2 to step 3, the error spans, and the drop rate. And from there, you can dive deeper into by clicking on the corresponding trace IDs. So that's it for the tracing funnel demo. Hope you enjoyed, and free feel to experiment with the feature and come up with new requests if you have. Thanks.